He flew to Thailand in 2014. That was actually when we first met to brief me up on the Chinese information war issues and to see if I was interested in looking more into it, which I did. So since that time, we've focused heavily on Chinese information war and Chinese information operations and other things that China does. And that's why I've written actually 3 books on the subject now. That's my latest book that came out about a month ago in Japan. And so that's my 3rd book on Chinese information war. And so, but anyway, Al Johnson is one of the most brilliant people you'll ever meet. He did 2 tours in Iraq as an EOD officer, and then now advises various, mostly Asian countries on counterterrorism. It's very, very, very interesting information. I can only let Al talk about it because I don't know how far Al will let me go. But Al, I'm going to turn it over to you. You were saying something interesting, and then we got cut off.
I think we got jammed, but okay, we'll go with
Jammed.
cutoff.
Yeah, we got cut off somehow.
So no, that was like I said. The final point on that one for those that can look over on the first one is that the Czech Republic, like Taiwan and like some other nations, look easily at this, not easily, but they made the decisions that they could do quick decisions and implement them rapidly, and then most of those areas that seem to be able to do well in that are ones that had previously been under the boot of a communist regime, and so they were able to recognize when those sorts of mechanisms are put into play and resist them and not fall into that trap. But unfortunately, like I said, in the West, we've gone into kind of a trap. We are more concerned with things that make us just a little bit mentally uncomfortable versus actually looking at a problem and saying, okay, is this A, going to kill people? B, is this going to economically destroy someone? C, is this going to, set people up for, health damage over the long term? And then at the bottom of that is, mentally a little bit comfortable or uncomfortable, so to speak. And so we've kind of reversed our priorities. And in that, we're not able to respond when an actual threat comes up. Good indicator of that was, the one agency that's, as I said earlier, organizational structure dictates outcomes. So if you have an agency whose sole purpose initially was to, track and simply stop the spread of infectious diseases, and then you add on to that organization secondary, tertiary, other things that have nothing to do with your actual goal of preventing infectious diseases, and then you give them money for that and say, okay, here's another big portion of your budget will come from these ancillary activities that don't have anything to do with that. Your focus is going to get distracted. You're not going to be 100% on target. You're going to get distracted with your other duties, your other jobs, your other budgets. And as such, you can't do everything perfectly. Something is going to fall through. And unfortunately, it looks like some of that may have been actually preventing the spread of infectious diseases to some degree. Now, the autopsy of that's going to have to take a while. So the organizational autopsy about, how they responded to the coronavirus won't be probably for another year. There'll be a lot of noise that'll come out, but we can see that there were some flaws and we can take some lessons learned from that in the short term. And then withhold, full judgment till you get all the documents, all the information in a little later on. But that's something important as we can look at other countries and say, okay, what really did they do? How did they respond to it? When did they respond to it? And was it effective? And for me, I think we need to put Czech Republic back in there with Taiwan. Yes, South Korea, even though they got off to a wrong foot politically, they managed culturally and socially to recover. And then, some of those other countries that have done real well. The one that's the anomaly that I can't figure out, and I think that's for people far smarter than me, is Japan, because it should be a high rate, but it's not. And that's the one it's very confusing. And, we don't have data on that yet. But I think it's a good intellectual exercise for everyone to kind of look at this and analyze that data as it stands.
I've been wondering about Japan as well. And you and I both know a lot of Japanese. We both have a lot of Japanese friends. And the only explanation that comes to mind would be the social cultural discipline that Japanese have, which is super high. In other words, wearing masks immediately. We were talking offline before we went live about what you saw, for instance, in a big store in the United States, telling people not to wear a mask. Right? Was that in March?
Correct.
Or when was that?
Exactly. That was that was early March. So there was a large bulk chain store up here in the Northwest, And folks from Asia. In fact, BBC had a great article on the cultural nuances of wearing masks. It was Singapore. BBC Singapore actually came out with a great article on it about what are these cultural differences. In fact, it's Tessa Wong from BBC News Singapore put it on BBC News. Why some countries wear face masks and others don't. And so you have Japanese, South Koreans, Singaporeans, these folks that are here, and they know when they get sick normally they'll put on a mask. It's just common courtesy, right? You inhibit the ability of you to sneeze and spread your disease normally. And in these times, especially those people that came from countries that had the SARS and the MERS epidemic, they understand some of these preventative measures, which were wearing a mask. So there was a couple of families that posted on social media that they were trying to get into this large warehouse chain store to go shopping, wearing masks, and they were instructed to take it off, and they were barred entry from going in there without having to take it off. And this is after I'd have to go back and look at it, but I'd be curious to see if it was after some of these other countries said you have to do masks. Like 18 of March, for example, was checked that you can't go out without a mask. So the rest of the world, some people that are dialed in and aren't afraid culturally to say put a dang mask on. But like one of your readers said, we saw those comments. Part of it was also that, yes, there was a shortage. So therefore, you don't want to run on masks. I mean, look what happened with toilet paper over here.
Right.
Store shelves are gone to toilet paper. You don't want that to happen to masks because there's going to be a shortage. You want to keep that for your frontline fighters, which are your EMTs, your docs, your police, those folks that are out there and can't shelter in place. You got to keep doing their job.
You're breaking up a little bit. If you're moving around, stay still. Al.
I will shelter in place even more. How's that?
Shelter in place, Al. Shelter in place.
There we go. I will freeze.
All right. Hey, Caroline Elizabeth Marie is asking, is it safe to have our windows open? I live in New York. Al, can you answer that?
Well, it depends. I'm not a virologist. I'm not an infectious disease expert. All I know is contamination from, WMD stuff. So, ChemBio, that kind of thing. But it would depend on your geography. Like if you're in a farm and you've got a lot of area between you and fresh air between you, I would say, probably it would be okay. But if you're in an apartment block and you're facing a window of an adjacent flat, then I would be concerned somewhat. Again, I don't know your environment, your geography. Probably best that one to go with an infectious disease expert as far as what's going on. But I do know that this virus is more virulent than people thought. It lasts a lot longer. It's tenacious. And just today, I think the National Institute of Science, in fact, it was a Drudge report was saying, yes, it is airborne. Despite everybody saying, no, it's not. You can only get on contact surfaces. It does present itself, and it is an inhalation hazard, according to everything that I've been seeing. That's the predominance, despite what the World Health Organization says, or as you said, the Surgeon General with don't wear your mask. But I think we need to be honest about why some people were saying it was because we did have a shortage. We were off put because we didn't have enough in reserve. And when the catastrophe hits, you have to plan, in some respects, I have to say, having had to plan for many contingencies, you can't plan 100% for everything. You can plan for it, but you may not be able to actuate those plans. You can't buy 100% of everything. I always have, I have contingency bags. I have contingency operations ready to go for different things. But there's always something out there that will be, there's the most likely threat, the most dangerous threat. And you have to do a balance between them. And I think this one really set people off, but only because they weren't able to suspend their bias, if that makes sense, for what they were seeing. Like I said, in January, I think it was when you and I and a bunch of other people had the same reaction. We saw that, the Chinese first were covering it up and, nothing to see here. We're having a great time in the Chinese New Year. And then suddenly you shut down their big industrial center. And there's some other traffic, I won't really go into, but there was a lot there that was like something is brewing in Wuhan and it's not good. And the Chi-Coms do not react this way. They locked up 1 million Muslims in concentration camps and didn't blink an eye. It doesn't bother them.
No.
History.
They will go full Nazi. And that's why Hong Kongers call them Chi-Nazis. Cynthia Woods. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, the shoe fits. And so the problem is that, we saw that, and I think some of the people would only defer to certain groups. So, for example, the World Health Organization was putting out information that it was getting from China at face value. They weren't criticizing it. They weren't critiquing it. and saying, well, wait a minute, we want to talk to the doctors. We want to have a team right away, right now in Wuhan, like they're supposed to, and validate this data. We want to check out those virology labs, the two of them that are there, the P4 and then the other one, and let's look at it. Let's see what you guys found. Hey, what about this information, these social media things on Weibo and everything that came out from some of the researchers, from the doctors?
They're never going to allow that out. You know how China rolls.
No,
they're never going to allow that.
But I mean, that's the point. And the problem was rather than put a caveat on information, in other words, I don't have this information, I don't know. Those numbers don't seem right. It doesn't fit the modeling. We can't really trust information coming out of what we see in China. And the World Health Organization is supposed to be that. It's supposed to be a World Health Organization. Their responsibility is for the health of the globe, everybody, right? Regardless, it's supposed to bypass political borders. That's what it was for. Oddly enough, and I'm going to divert here for a little bit. I apologize for the digression, but to put it in perspective, it has in the past done some good things. And in fact, the League of Nations actually had a infectious disease bureau within the League of Nations, and it may not have done well to prevent war, but it did an excellent job in Southeast Asia of preventing infectious diseases through information sharing, and that is among competing colonial powers such as France and Britain at that time in Southeast Asia, and the nominal independent power, which was Thailand, or Siam up until it became Thailand in 1938. So they exchanged information very rapidly. They put quarantines in effect. And in fact, the royal family, the Thai royal family, was quarantined on a ship for 2 weeks because they had come from Haiphong in what was then Indochina, French Indochina, back to Siam, back to Thailand. And the alert had come out that there was a cholera epidemic, so they kept them on the ship. So regardless of what happened, everybody listened because the regional at that point and global health was at risk. They had gone through the Spanish flu. They realized this is serious, and the League of Nations was actually able to cut through the political. I mean, you had two competing political or colonial powers, France, actually three, with Dutch. So the Dutch, the French, the British, and then you had the independent group Siam. But they communicated with this infectious diseases, worked together, shared things. Siam was very proactive in anti-malarial campaigns. They sent doctors down to conferences in Singapore. They hosted a malaria conference in Bangkok, which is one of the first conferences hosted by an Asian nation, International Global Conference. So the League of Nations was doing its job. And we have to reassess, I think, the World Health Organization and say, look, it didn't do anything, especially now if they've given out information that is demonstrably false and, without a caveat. We don't know. I mean, say if you don't know, we don't know. We have no idea how this is done. And so they took things at face value. And some American experts at the state and the local levels that I've seen were saying they were sourcing the WHO, the World Health Organization, and the WHO was sourcing without caveat China, the Beijing China, so the bad guys, the CCP guys. And so we have a problem. When we are making our public health statements or we're making any type of decisions based upon very poor CHICOM data, there's a problem in the system that needs to be reassessed.
Right. Now, I want to address something. Cynthia Wood says, oh, no, I haven't thought of being outside in the fresh air in my backyard without wearing my mask. Really? Cynthia, I'm not an infectious disease expert either, but I think if there's nobody around you and you're outside in the fresh air, I think your chances of getting infected if nobody's around you are extremely small. I haven't heard anybody, and I read about this 7 days a week. This is all I'm studying is what's going on with this virus. I haven't seen anybody, even in the most stretch of the imagination, say that you can get infected from, a breeze coming through the neighborhood. Somebody has to be close by you. Now, keep in mind, as we're talking and, spittle comes out, it can get picked up by a breeze from behind you, or you sneeze or somebody sneezes and it can get picked up and go pretty far actually. And so, but if there's nobody around you and you're just in the sunlight in your neighborhood, I wouldn't even think about it. When I go outside and there's nobody around me, I take my mask off normally. Sometimes I walk with it on I wear this mask, by the way, which you can wear hours at a time and it doesn't bother you at all. Like, it's a 3M 7502. And sometimes I'll wear that for a couple of reasons. One is to keep training myself to wear it. And also, the air pollution here is horrific. So not even for the virus, but for the air pollution. Al, you've been to Thailand many times. You know how the air pollution can be in Asia.
Oh yeah, especially when they do those clear cut burns down in Indonesia and the smog starts coming up.
Yeah, Indonesia and Malaysia too, and well, boy, that really upsets a lot of people down there in Singapore, doesn't it?
Yep. Oh yeah. So that's also a problem. And like one of your folks had it that, upsetting the ACE, it seems to be, and again, this question is far better for some, folks in infectious diseases, but it seems to be, at least from what I've seen, the ACE2 receptors in your lungs are the ones that this targets. And so places with high air pollution, smokers, I mean, I stopped smoking cigars back in January because, when I started reading what was coming out of China, I said, well, okay, how does this thing function? So, reduce your chance of doing it. And the best defense is personal behavior. And again, this may go back to why some countries this is hitting lower than others. It may be that there are certain things that they do within their normal behavior that reduces the effect of the virus on them, either them to catch it through personal hygiene, or the effect once it's in them to be able to take hold, and then the magnitude of the severity of the symptoms. And ACE2 receptors is one of them. So, smokers, they have a problem. People with high exposure to air pollution, that's a problem. Folks that don't get a lot of sunlight, I think one of your readers has vitamin D. That's a huge one, because vitamin D is very, very important for your defense against viruses. So, make sure you get good sunlight, good exercise. Vitamin D comes in there. Nutrition plays a big part. So looking at these outlier countries, going, kind of full circle back to where we were with Japan, or Taiwan, a lot of it may also have to be with the ability of the society to have basic hygiene, right? So, we used to have field hygiene guys, right? When you go out to the field and you do your thing, there's always a field hygiene guy, right? Brush your teeth, change your socks, wash your hands, make sure wash your hands before eating. And field hygiene is a big deal. And some people roll their eyes at it, but, disease would wipe out armies far easier than, bullets would. And it's always been that way, and it probably always will be that way.
Well, as a former Army officer, you're very well aware that, more casualties are caused by environmental factors such as disease or weather than are caused by artillery even. So, I mean, that's just a fact of war through time and space. Not so much with the U.S. military these days, because normally we have incredibly good vector control and that sort of thing, and high discipline on keeping everything clean. But, the U.S. military has been concerned for years that a pandemic could really, really reduce our force. And a lot of our military specialties are, easy to reconstitute, and then others are extremely difficult. There's some people that, it takes 10, 15 years to just get them up to some level of competence that they're useful, I mean, it's like medical doctors and that sort of thing. You can't just, have an assembly line for medical doctors. And that concerns me, Al, is that if we lose thousands of doctors and nurses and law enforcement and these really key people, we can't just remake all these doctors and nurses. A lot of people don't understand that nurses in the United States and the UK and some other countries are actually highly trained medical professionals. They're not just there to sweep floors and change bandages. They're very serious people, and doctors obviously as well. And we can't just remake them. So I'm very concerned that we could lose thousands in the next year or two, and that can put I haven't heard anybody even talk about this. That can put a long stress on us for, I don't know. I mean, in addition to having lost all these incredible people and, mothers and fathers, a lot of them, then that could put us in a strategic, medically, that could put us in a very bad position as the years unfold.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. And, kind of reminded, I'm dating myself here, but remembering Operation Dark Winter back in June of, I think it was 2001. So it was before 9/11, just a few months before. But it was basically a simulation through Johns Hopkins and the U.S. military and Department of Homeland Security and all those folks that were doing it, and about a mass pandemic. So I think it was like smallpox that they were using as their vector. And it was looking at, what were the impacts to the United States at that time. And the U.S. typically will go through this. So and part of our contingency planning, it's looking at the critical infrastructure that's affected by an attack, and in a biological attack, people are affected by it. You're not gonna lose a nuclear power plant by it, but you'll lose the people, the employees of a nuclear power plant, by a biological outbreak. So, the findings, going back in that one, the findings are absolutely that, because personnel, you can't lose a certain percentage of your critical personnel without a failure, and then there's cascading effects. So there's a threshold you look at with your medical personnel, and nurses are very critical to the whole. I mean, nurses are like the cornerstone of the medical system. Really,
and we're always in shortage of nurses anyway to start with.
Absolutely. It was before this. I mean, there was always that. So nurses do, a workload that, most people couldn't handle, especially in multiple shifts. They'll pull graveyard double shifts. And this pandemic is making them work, quadruple the time. And the fear is such that in the pandemic that you're worried about taking that home. And this is the stress factor, right? You always have to look at what creates stress upon your personnel, your critical personnel, and what could break them, right? And there's the physical breaking and then the psychological breaking. And when you stress people to such a degree, and there's multiple ways that they can get stressed, but they can still function. But one of those ways is that they're separated from their family, or they're fearful for their family. And so what happens in this one is that these personnel, some of them are not able to go home because they're afraid of infecting their family. Or those that do go home, they always have a nagging fear in the back that they've infected their family, that their very job is now endangering their loved one. And that's a stress that, deployed soldiers, we didn't have. I mean, you go overseas, you come back home, and that's it. And police officers, they have some of that. They have to work in the community that they have, and they may be shopping, and, oh, great, there's the guy arrested last week, shopping, and he's looking at my kid. There's that stress. But this one is literally my job. I can bring it home and kill my family. And that stress is very high.
Yeah.
And so those nurses and those doctors are operating under stressors that, bomb techs, may get in a moment, in a flash, but then when you move away from it, you're safe separation distance, and that thing's rendered safe. It's gone. You're done. You go back, you have a beer. This thing is going to linger for quite a long time. So that stress isn't momentary or temporary. It's a very long-term, consistent stress, and how they have to deal with that and maintain operational capability is going to be something that hospital administrators really haven't thought about, except for combat hospital folks. And that's why I think the military can do a good job in helping out with what we used to call combat stress casualties, and looking at the medical personnel, the first responders, and keeping them what they call resilient and functional, and being able to get them that type of support. In addition to PPE, you need some mental PPE, right? I mean, you and I know it. That's what'll break before sometimes your equipment does, or your equipment can break and I can keep going. But the moment I have a mental PPE break, I'm done. You can lose it. And part of that, I think, is communities like Seattle, and I'm going to divert for a little bit here. We just
I want to say one more time. I want to say Al Johnson, who's on the line right now, my friend, he's was a military officer, and he did a couple combat tours as EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal, which is one of the most stressful jobs you can imagine, especially in Iraq, which is where he served. And so, when he talks about, stress on the job, really, the two most stressful jobs I think that I've seen in the wars is in Iraq and Afghanistan were EOD and medic. EODs and medics, super stressful. So Al knows exactly what he's talking about.
Thanks for that. But eventually we were able to drink to kind of compensate for that. But we won't go into that.
Setting a bad example for the kids, Al.
Well, sorry. But I'm not now, because I got to keep my immune system going. But as an example, like, for example, and, that's where I think there's some benefit for, military support to civil authorities is something they need to think about, is supporting these first responders in the middle of this epidemic, because it's a long-term stress, it's a consistent pressure, and being able to have, like I said, what we used to call combat stress casualties, to be able to handle that on the first responders is going to be critical, because you will have some breakdowns. I mean, I'm already seeing some news things. I don't have any firsthand evidence of it, but I've seen some news that says that some hospital personnel have refused to go to work and things like that. And that's normal. That will happen when people are fearful, and they're fearful for their families. It'll happen. I mean, you even saw it, in Hurricane Katrina. We talked to a guy named Bill Loki, who was the deputy director of FEMA. and really good firsthand accounts of what happens when a system begins to stress beyond its capacity. And you had first responders that were really good, on the job full time, but once their families, they felt threatened for their families, and they felt like they had no more control over the situation. They moved away. They went to their families. It's a natural human reaction to go to your family, circle the wagons, and say, "I got to protect the homestead." So you can't really fault those folks for it, because they didn't sign it. They didn't quite sign up for exactly this. It was the bomb that was dropped on them, right? So that's what they got. But up here in Seattle, and I think they've got these in other states, but Seattle's really good. They set up over at what we used to call Safeco Field. It's now CenturyElite Field, an Army field hospital. So guys out from Fort Carson, Colorado, was the 10th Field Hospital and the 627th Hospital Center. They set up a large, I think it's a 250-bed Fields Hospital, and then they were augmented by 67 Med Brigade. I'm sorry, 67 Med Brigade out here at Fort Lewis, or JBLAM now, McLewis, Joint Base Lewis McChord. And so it's like 500 to 600 Army medical folks that are out there, and they're going to do everything from intensive care, X-ray, your labs, pharmacy, surgical, for non-coronavirus patients. So they're going to be able to take the workload off of the King County and area, the Seattle King County, which has, I think, 490 beds or 4,900 beds, but 940 of those are critical care. But the last briefing, like a few days ago, they're already at 70% capacity. So, and Seattle's not been hit hard. So, having those things in place where you can help out with taking the stress off of the first responders. So non-coronavirus, non-critical folks can go, or even critical folks, but are not corona. You don't want to expose them as much as you can to the coronavirus, which will be present in a hospital that has a corona patients. So those being able to have that relief valve to go over to Safeco Field, to these guys with the 10th Field Hospital Unit, 627th Hospital Center, U.S. Army will be able to handle that for them. So that's kind of a good news story in the middle of all this, is that that's being implemented, and it's being implemented throughout the country, that they have that to be able to help out. But
that's
the community,
funny. You're a typical military officer. You're like, let's look at the good news. I was talking to one of my friends before I called you. I was talking to one of my friends. He's an Army colonel. Well, he's out now, but he's retired. And he's a great commander in combat and all that, and it was fantastic. And he was saying, he was starting to give me, let's look at the bright side, Michael, and give me all that like a brigade commander would do, And I'm like, you're coming at me, like a military officer. We're going to look at the bright side. We're going to get through this. And I'm coming at you like an NCO. There's gooks in the wire. You know what I mean? And it's like,
right. And my other, so yeah, organizational structure dictates outcome, but the other one is, as long as you're vertical at the end of the day, for me, it's a good day. Like, how you doing? Well, I'm not dead yet, so must be good.
Exactly. Look, you've done a couple combat tours as a military officer, an EOD of all things. How do you recommend that people help our medical professionals, our law enforcement, military, National Guard, truck drivers, everybody that we need to keep on the front line? Like, we need you driving those trucks. We need you going to the emergency rooms, and the cops, we need you out there. How do you recommend that people help them to reduce the stress in their lives so they can keep operating?
Well, a couple ways. I mean, same with any organizational structure. When you try to take off the stressors from it, what you want to do is you want to reduce the workload as much as you can. Right now, they're going to be operationally, their op tempo, as we used to call it, is very high. So the truck drivers, they're working long hours. They're doing all these hauls. They're having to move a lot of product quickly. The ER docs, the ER nurses, the aides, the orderlies, they're going double shifts, triple shifts. They're not having any rest. So finding a way that the non-essential, the non-COVID stuff, right, that's not burdening them, right? You're not making any undue stress on the system. So, for example, one thing is I'm listening to all the scanner traffic that goes on, and there's a tremendous amount of superfluous calls that are going on, that are still going on, that you would think should be suspended. So, if you're not, don't speed down the road, right? Because they still have to handle that, right? A traffic accident in the middle of this. So a policeman that's on a shift, every traffic accident now, his stressor still goes up. Why? Because the people he has to go save out of that car, they may have COVID. He may infect himself. Every single response call that he goes to, every single response call you go to, I don't know if that person is the next person that's going to kill me or is going to kill my family. That's really how they look at it. If you're brutally honest about it, right? When I go look at somebody, if I have to interact with them, and first responders have to interact with them, is this person I'm going to interact with going to be the one that's going to do me in? I don't know, right?
And worse, you're thinking about bringing it back to your family,
Bingo.
bringing it back to your family and your comrades. And, as somebody, I lost my mother when I was 7. And let me tell you what, that's the worst thing that happened in my entire life. Nothing else comes close. And so, the effect on losing a parent for a young child like that is severe. And so that's something that would be on the back of my mind as well. Like, I don't want to leave my children behind, not at this age. I mean,
Exactly.
if I die when they're in their 20s, fine, but not when they're 7, not when they're 4, something like that. You don't want to, there's going to be massive stress. And a lot of these nurses and doctors are young parents. And so, they might make that decision. Look, I'm going to be a mother first. And nobody could blame them for that. Yeah, this is a tough situation that we're in here, and we have to think of every way that we can to reduce their stress. For instance, if your neighbor's a nurse or a policeman or whatever, just ask them, what can I do to help you out? What's the one thing I can do for you to help take a little stress off your life? And
Exactly.
they might say right off the top of my head, I need somebody to feed my dog. You know what I mean? And you'd be like, I got it under control, no problem. Your dog can stay with me. You know what I mean? Just little things like that could be big for just first thing off the top of your head. What can I do to reduce your stress, to facilitate you to be calm and get your job done the way you need to get it done?
Exactly. So yeah, reduce burdens to their system so they can focus on this new paradigm of the pandemic, right? Because they're operating under new guidelines. They haven't had to operate this way before, so they're adjusting to this new paradigm that's very, very dangerous for them. Second is just what you said. Hey, what can I do to help? Is there something I can do to help? Or like the police, they have these fraternal organizations, the chaplaincy through the police unions, that sort of thing. Is there something I can donate? If I can't physically go and help you out, also because social distancing, you have to be careful somewhat. But is there something we can donate to? I've seen some stories of folks, buying a whole emergency room staff lunch, like, hey, here you go, and have it delivered. Thank you very much. So words of support from the community that you recognize what they do is also helpful. Hey, we're here to help out as much as we can. I've seen a lot of companies will donate and individuals will donate PPE. They'll bring it up and drop it off. So, but asking them what they need, because sometimes every organization is different. They may need something else, and every individual is different. They may need something else, like you said. And then for organizations as well, like with the military, we used to have, as family readiness groups or family support groups, it used to be called. And some first responder units have it, some don't. So, looking at those, if they have it, seeing how you can support the families of the first responders is also important, because sometimes those guys aren't going home to protect their own family. They've made the decision that they'll sleep in the department. They're not going to go home to infect their family. And it's difficult. It's almost like a deployment, right? So what happens sometimes with a family with one of the family members is gone, or sometimes both might have to be go if they're both parents are first responders and the grandparents may have to take care of the kids. I mean, there's a lot of disruption, a lot of stress in the home. And the more that can be alleviated, that helps, in these times. So there's a lot of people can.
That's an important point. Like, to widen that out, not just what can I do to help you, but do you need me to help your family? Because obviously, when soldiers deploy to the wars, and this is absolutely a war, this is combat now across the world, not just New York City, but it's unfolding across everywhere. A huge stress on deployed soldiers is, how is my family doing? A lot of them are more stressed out about that than they are about even combat. It's strange. You might think they'd be stressed on the combat. They're stressed about wondering how it's going on at home. My wife, I talked with her on the phone. There's a leak in the roof or something. You hear stories like that, and they start getting worried. And it distracts from their mission, which can get them killed, right? Yeah, helping the families is Al brings up a really important point. I mean, that's vital.
Yep. And so that's basically, four quick and easy things that the community can do to support those folks right now that are protecting the community. I mean, those are your frontline fighters. That's your defense. And so the more everybody can help each other out, the better we can weather the storm.
Yeah. Al, what else is going on there? I mean, have you been out to the stores much in Seattle?
No, well, funny. I mean, back in January is when we kind of got not the war note, but we saw the signs and we're like, okay, hold on a second. let's start looking at this thing. How bad is it? I think I was sheltered in, I want to say that late February. So I didn't need to go shopping or anything. I've got everything squared away. So I've not needed to go out. I'll do a like a drop off run. A couple folks needed some stuff, so I had it in my supplies. So I was able to run it over, just drop it off on their porch, and then I'll go around testing signal areas with with my new ham radio stuff. I'll go around seeing, okay, when they do an Aries call net, I'll go around to different positions and kind of see, okay, where's the signal the best of the repeater that I can listen to. But other than that, I've pretty much been able to just shelter in place and not be potentially a spread person.
Yeah, I mean that's a vital part as well. Not just not getting it, but not spreading it as well, which is a lot of asymptomatic people have been spreading it. That's known at this point. Well, Al, I want to have you on as much as possible because listen. When you get Al Johnson on, you should ask him. You won't believe what's in his big head. He's got skills that are just like he's got one of those resumes, not really a resume, CV that is just kind of difficult to explain, but it's quite extensive and it's quite interesting. Let me see if there's any. Can you see the questions coming up, Al? Do you even see a screen?
Yeah. So I'll look on there's two parts. So which one do you want me to look on?
If there's any specific questions for you, I'm just looking before we sign off. Let's see.
Well, there's a comment from, I think, your Czech guy. There's a guy, I'm probably pronouncing it terribly wrong, but Jiri Sita. And he says, we sew our own masks in the Czech, even for the medical staff. So they're making their own masks in the Czech Republic. They didn't have enough. Even with those procedures they still had to come together as a community and make some. So that's interesting. I'd like to get more information about that from him if he's listening, because that'd be a nice data point to have.
Scott Kervik asked, any sort of idea as to how long after quote unquote kicking the virus a person is able to be in contaminated areas before they catch the virus again? Okay, hold on. I'm not a virologist or an infectious disease expert, so I'm not going to even attempt to answer that, other than to say I am always watching what they're saying about that. And this is a question that's up in the air at this point. And so I hate to say, I refer you to the CDC, who says we shouldn't wear masks. You know what I'm saying? This is a problem. We have a big credibility gap between our CDC and our Surgeon General. They've lied to us to our faces. And so it's difficult for me to then say, okay, so now pay attention to what they say from this. So at this point, I don't know. I'm watching as much as I can. Al, if you have an answer for that, please give it a shot.
The only thing I would do is, again, like you, I'm not an infectious disease guy, so the actual answer, I don't know, and I don't think we have it yet. But what I like to do is I like to look at folks that had the infection before we did and then see what's going on there. So one data matrix that's kind of hard to do if you don't have a way to peek behind the screen is, what's going on now in Wuhan. So they lifted their shelter-in-place quarantine, and there is some indication that there are some secondary infections or second wave that come out. So, there's two answers to that. One is, how much are you individually safe? So if you catch coronavirus, how long afterward are you still spreading it? And that's up for the medical doctors and more data to really definitively put out there now that we've got a hold of the virus, so to speak, and can do the studies on it. But the second part is the social part. And that's the modeling. That's where it gets more complex, because it's a more complex social system. So look at countries that open up their quarantine, open up their shelter in place, and then see what is the reinfection, what is that. And keep in mind history, as you always have to do with these things, in that, in past pandemics like the Spanish flu, the the first wave isn't the tough one. It's the second and the third wave. And the viruses can mutate, especially an RNA-based virus. They mutate a lot. And so look throughout history where viruses have mutated and they change characteristics and they become either more dangerous or they burn out. And that's something that you need to keep, your finger on the pulse with, and with multiple sources, because right now we haven't really worked a good system, as Mike said, for those sources for, who's really trustworthy. And that hopefully will get solved with some time and some organizational changes. But yeah, definitely keep looking and seeing what happens with these other countries that reduce their restrictions, and is there a reinfection, that sort of thing. For the social, for the individual, that's up to the medical docs and what they do and what they say. Hopefully
All right.
I answered it.
Thank you, Al. And if there's any other questions, I'll try to take them right now. And otherwise, I want to go ahead and shut off for now. And again, I wanted to say that Maura Moynihan is going to start being a co-host on here, and I'm going to try to rope Al into doing the same, because once you listen to Al once or twice, you can already see he is a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of experience on counterterrorism issues, on Chinese information war issues, his combat tours in Iraq, and a lot more. And he fasts a lot. He likes to fast too. So he's really.
Well, that was, and you actually helped us with that. So you're the guy that got me into fasting.
Yeah, well, now you've taken it to extreme, and you're doing so great, and I think your father too. And actually, Al has a tortoise, if you can believe that. So he's a tortoise owner, or maybe the tortoise owns you. And yeah, I always think that's funny that you've got Gamera there. Let's see. Neha says CDC asked grocery stores to implement 6 feet away in line to pay at the cashiers. The cashiers don't wear masks or gloves. That's just unbelievable. And hopefully Al will be back, Barbara. And Martin Poole says, I've posted my question already. I might have missed it, Martin. Just post it again, because there's a lot of questions up there, and I'll try to hit it before we sign off. If you can add it back to the bottom. Is Al on Twitter? Al, are you on Twitter? If you're on Twitter, I don't follow it. I follow your Facebook.
I was. I still am. I kind of follow a couple people, but Twitter, it's 120 words or so, or 120 characters. And to me, I can't talk in sound bites sometimes. Unfortunately, I ramble on. So I am on it, and I'll forward some things occasionally. So I think I'm over there. I'm on Bomb Killer 007 is my handle.
Yeah, Bomb Killer 007, because he was EOD, right? And still is EOD. He teaches he teaches people in many countries on counterterrorism issues, and I've been to some of the training actually, and some of Al's training over in Indonesia and also in Thailand, and Mr. Poole said he had a question, Martin Poole, but I didn't see him. There it is. Can CDC exclude other viruses with the test? I'm not an expert on that. I'm not even going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. So you're going to have to get that from experts on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it'd be good to get a infectious disease expert on there. One thing you can talk about though is I'd be interested to get one of those people from the Chulalongkorn University in Thailand that made the little antibody test. So they made it like a home pregnancy test that they could send out, and you just take a little bit of blood, you put it on this thing, it has 2 red lines, and if one red line, if both of them show up and one of them's dotted, you have the antibodies. Your body's already doing the antibodies for the COVID-19, the CCP virus, Z's disease. But it's within 10 to 15 minutes, you've got an answer, and it's cheap, it's easy. You can mass mail these things out, and it's a home test. And so, good on Chulalongkorn University there in Bangkok for developing this and getting it out there. So I think that'd be a nice guest for you. Is, hey, how'd you guys come up with it, and what's the success rate so far, and things like that, because that's a great way to let people know, that even with asymptomatic traits, that you have the antibodies in your system, quick and easy, do it that way. So good for those guys.
Robert Day says, what does Al do for work now? I'll let you answer that.
I feed my tortoise.
Yeah, he does a little more than that. All right. And look, Al, I hope you come back on, and not just soon, but like in the next few days would be great with a sit rep on whatever you see is going on out there, because I know you watch 7 days a week like I do. Let's
Sure.
see. Don Sakuda says, "What's your opinion on the commander of the Roosevelt being relieved of duty?" Don, I don't know why he was relieved, so I have no opinion. I just
Mm.
I'm just absorbing the information that he was relieved of command and
Well,
running
there's
quiet on that for now.
yeah, not that specific, but there's the geopolitical side. So this goes back a little bit, and I'll keep this really short. I apologize, but part of the thing was that there was actually in the Chinese cybersphere and in the Asian, Southeast Asian social network sphere, so to speak. There was a lot of promotion of the Chi-Coms promoted their ability to be able during this time. I mean, during the COVID. So think about that. We tend to look at China in a certain way, but what were they focusing on? They were in the Bohai Strait, and they launched multiple J-15 fighter jets from their aircraft carrier, the Liaoning. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but Liaoning. And they landed several hours later. So they did a really nice, successful, mass launch of the decks with their J-15 fighter jets. Did maneuvers and landed. And that was a showcase that, hey, in the middle of the coronavirus, we can deploy an aircraft carrier and do operations, carrier-led drills.
Right.
And then the second part of that was that they have their second aircraft carrier, the Shandong, and they made a big deal about that. And that was that they had zero COVID-19, supposedly zero COVID-19 cases, and that was, I think, mid-February. They were pushing that out there. So the Shandong was, the PLA Navy is absolutely COVID-free on an aircraft carrier, and we can go forward and support this stuff. So it was almost a war propaganda type of thing. That they're saying, hey, this is all, we're COVID-free, but that's not. So understanding sometimes, what China is taking advantage of and what they do in their messaging is very important, because it usually masks what really is going on behind the scenes. Now knowing what this virus does, is that logical that they would have zero COVID-19 cases on an aircraft carrier, deployed out with people from all over? No. So, keeping those things in mind is important as we wrestle with a virus. Calling BS on some of the Chinese propaganda stuff is one of the exercises we can kind of do to keep ourselves mentally fit during this time.
Right. And all right, Al, why don't you do whatever you're going to do today? It's 05:48 here in Thailand, so it's almost 6 o'clock in the morning. And actually, several people have asked about wearing masks outside. Do you have to wear a mask outside? I'm about to take my dog Barney for a walk, and I'm not going to wear a mask because there's not going to be anybody around but Barney and me. So when I go outside,
does Barney get a mask?
Barney, no, but you see a lot of Thai people putting masks on their dogs and cats. You know how Thais love their cats and dogs. So I saw one lady had her cat. I put it on my Instagram. This lady had her cat like in a boy in a bubble thing. It was in Chiang Mai. You know how she had the cat in like this total COVID protection system on her back. It was very funny. Because Thais will look out for their cats and dogs like Americans will. It's funny. A lot of Americans have never been to Thailand. They're like, "Oh, Thais eat dogs." I'm like, they don't eat any more dogs than we do. You know what I mean? In fact, they're like, "What are you talking about?" I mean, there are some that are, because there's many cultures in Thailand, but and Al, by the way, spends a huge amount of time in Thailand. And so he knows exactly what I'm talking about. But no, Thais are not dog eaters. You know what I mean? You have to come and see. You'll love Thailand. All right, Al. Anything final words, and we'll shoot off here.
Well, that's pretty much it. Appreciate your time and letting me come on and ramble here a bit. And then any more information you need, just let me know, and I'll be available.
All right, brother. I'm gonna knock this off. Al
All
out
right, keep up the
and
good fight.
Mike out.